My mother blames my sister, who has Down syndrome, for our father leaving and refuses to let me take custody. She has been the biggest source of pain in my life, and things only got worse later on, breaking my heart. When my mom was pregnant with my sister Mary, a diagnostic screening confirmed that Mary had Down syndrome. Upon hearing the news, my dad moved out and filed for divorce. Without his financial support, we had to relocate to a more affordable home. During the pregnancy, my mom was determined to be the best mother she could. However, a few weeks after Mary was born, my parents' divorce was finalized, and my mom got full custody while my dad had visitation rights twice a week. I refused to see him, and he showed no interest in Mary. To this day, we have no relationship with him. After the divorce, my mom fell into postpartum depression, leaving me to care for Mary. At the time, I had just started high school, but I had to step up and help take care of my sister because my mom couldn't do it alone. While I was at school, my mom would handle the most basic tasks, like feeding Mary and changing her diaper. However, she would wait for me to return home to take over the rest of the care, including nap time, playtime, sensory activities, physical therapy, and all the daily routines like feeding, bathing, and putting her to sleep. Despite having 10 weeks of paid maternity leave, my mom decided to return to work when Mary was only 8 weeks old. She did find a good daycare for her, and I felt relieved knowing Mary would be properly cared for while I was in school. My mom began to improve after returning to work, but she still wasn't very engaged with Mary. So, I reached out to her sister, my aunt, and told her everything. My aunt, who lives in Georgia and married into a wealthy family, offered to find a therapist for my mom and even cover the costs. Thankfully, my mom agreed to start therapy. She has 3 daughters and a son, aged 16, 20, 23, and 25. She's very conservative and has never openly discussed Mary having Down syndrome, but it's clear it bothers her. What seems to upset her the most is that my mom lost a stable marriage and home because of Mary. She never calls to wish Mary a happy birthday, but wires me $200 each year to buy a gift for her. It's essentially pity money, just to acknowledge Mary's existence. And that's all. I'm waiting for the day I'm financially secure enough to return all the birthday money she's sent over the years. During my high school summers, my mom would get upset with me for not working to earn money for my own expenses. Although my father paid around $2,000 in child support for both Mary and me, that money mostly went toward health insurance, with the rest covering things Mary and I needed, aside from food, medicine, and gas. I didn't want to work because summers were the only time I had to myself. Mary went to daycare a few times a week for a few hours, but I spent the rest of the time at home doing housework, errands, and taking care of her. Despite her developmental delays, by the time she was 3.5, she was walking, talking, sleeping in her own bed, and potty trained, all thanks to my efforts to help her be as independent as possible. Around that time, my mom stopped seeing her therapist and had already been off antidepressants for a while. She wasn't struggling with depression anymore, but she regretted having Mary, and coming to terms with that was the hardest thing I've ever done. I always hoped she would get better, that she'd eventually come around, but no amount of medicine could fix the way she dismissed Mary. When I graduated from high school, even though I had long known that college wasn't an option for me, it was still an incredibly painful realization. Even though it was something I wanted, after a 1-month trial at my friend's mom's event planning agency, I landed a full-time, well-paying job. Mom and I were financially stressed because my portion of child support ended when I turned 18, so this job was a lifesaver. I was excited to start saving money and finally give Mary her own room, since we had been sharing one. However, once I got the job, my mom decided to cut her hours and only work part-time because she felt she deserved a break from being the sole breadwinner and wanted to semi-retire. I was really upset because I now had to cover around 70% of the household expenses, while she contributed only occasionally and spent the rest of her money as she pleased. She no longer felt obligated to help out financially. A few months later, I ended up taking on a second job. It wasn't full-time. I worked from home, booking social media influencers with companies and helping them find suitable advertising and campaign opportunities. It was easy, and I could earn an extra $800 to $1,500 a month. After about a year, I had saved enough to buy a reliable used car. My mom had given me a used car for my 16th birthday, but she didn't want to pay for the repairs it needed, so I spent over 3 years driving Mary and myself in an unsafe vehicle. I was really proud of myself for finally getting a better car. So you can imagine my shock when my friend called to ask why I was selling it. I found out my mom had posted pictures of my new car on her Facebook and put it up for sale, claiming I didn't need such a fancy car. She suggested we split the money, and I could get a cheaper car because, according to her, I needed to be more responsible with my finances. The argument that followed was our biggest one yet, and we ended up setting some strict boundaries afterward. From that point on, our mom became more like a roommate to Mary and me. I even stopped calling her mom and started using her first name. Oddly, I found comfort in realizing that Mary wasn't the only one being treated this way. Our mom treated me the same. It wasn't us. It never was. She simply wasn't meant to be a parent. I transformed an upstairs office into a safari-themed bedroom for Mary, and we got annual Disney passes. We take little road trips together and travel when we can. I've taught myself how to cook, and Mary loves helping out in the kitchen. I have 3 close friends who I consider family, and they love both Mary and me unconditionally. It's a good life, even a great life. But I hate that. Deep down, I still feel like a victim because of everything that's happened. I've kissed someone once, been on 2 dates with different guys, and I've never had sex or gone to parties. I take Mary with me to my hair and nail appointments and handle all of her medical and therapy needs. I know every nursery rhyme and toy unboxing video on YouTube by heart. It feels awful to admit, but sometimes I get overwhelmed with sadness and bitterness when I think of the life I wanted but never got to live. I feel like I'm a 50-year-old trapped in a 21-year-old's body. It stings even more when I hear my mother compare me to my 20-year-old cousin who moved to Austin for college. They go shopping and have brunch together, and my mom is always eager to talk about her fun college life, the boy she's dating, and how lucky my aunt is to have such accomplished kids. She also likes to bring up another cousin who's won several beauty pageants, which only stings because my friends once asked if I wanted to apply for our school's pageant. My mom tried to embarrass me in front of them by saying I couldn't win anything with my daddy's face. I throw myself a mini pity party whenever my mom hits me where it hurts. And then I look at Mary, this sweet little girl who's almost 7 and just finished first grade with the most smiley and star stickers from her teacher. And I feel so ashamed of myself. The pandemic was tough on us because we suddenly had to stay home with our mother all the time. I had to juggle my job with Mary's homeschooling, and I made every effort to limit outings since Mary has asthma, which puts her at high risk. My mom, on the other hand, would go to the store twice a day just to get out or visit the park. And when things started opening up, she was the first to dine out and meet friends like it was no big deal. This led to another huge argument, and I told her we should go our separate ways, suggesting she let me take custody of Mary. I was serious, and she knew it. She responded by saying that Mary had already caused her embarrassment by making her get divorced, and she wasn't going to let it happen again by making herself look like an unfit parent. And she's right. I don't have much to go on, even if I wanted to take her to court. I'd completely drain my finances and lose the case, and Mary for good. My mom isn't abusive or hostile toward Mary. She's just indifferent. It's not even neglect, because she does pay for some things and will babysit if I need to run an errand, but she feels more like a stranger or roommate to us, not a mom. That realization really crushed me, and as I was sitting in the kitchen thinking about everything, Mary came in to ask for a snack. I didn't hear her the first time, so she repeated herself, and I snapped at her for the first time ever. She looked at me the same way she looks at our mom, and that terrified me. I fear I'll end up becoming like her because she constantly pushes my buttons. At this point, all I can do is save as much money as possible, gather proof of my finances and bills to show that I take care of Mary, and wait until I can afford a good lawyer and the court costs. I can't spend years waiting for her to pass away to gain custody of Mary. I just can't. I don't know what else to do to maintain my sanity, and more importantly, stop feeling so overwhelmed by self-pity and guilt, which Mary doesn't deserve. Thankfully, I've been contacted by a legal advisor from a company that does pro bono work, so I'm moving forward with that. I also didn't want to make it seem like I have no money. I have a great salary and can afford things like Disney trips and eating out a few times a week. But I cover almost all the household expenses, including insurance, and everything Mary needs, which is why I don't have much in savings. I'm planning to transfer half of the bills into my name and only pay my share. I know my mom well enough to expect that she'll be upset, but she'll likely use the situation to get more money from my aunt. I'm also taking on extra freelance work, and since we've been in quarantine, we've already cut back on a lot of expenses. With all these adjustments, I'll be able to save more and eventually move out when the time comes. I didn't want to drag Mary through a court battle while COVID-19 is still a risk, especially since she's high risk. So I've decided to wait a few months until things hopefully calm down before taking legal action. I just needed reassurance and encouragement that finding a way out is possible. I've also promised myself that once things settle down, I'll let my friends babysit Mary more often so I can go out and do things for myself, maybe even start dating. I might be terrible at it, but everyone has to start somewhere. It's so easy to feel incapable at times, but I'm trying to change that. When I needed support, fast forward a year, I found myself struggling to cope with the thought of spending Christmas without Mary by my side. Before that, I had consulted with an attorney. The attorney advised me to focus on getting my own life in order first, fixing whatever needed fixing, and then pursue legal guardianship over Mary. He didn't think I had a strong case because, as I mentioned earlier, my mom wasn't completely neglectful, abusive, or legally unfit as a parent. She simply dumped most of the responsibilities on me and used my love for Mary to manipulate me into staying. However, he believed that even though it would likely be messy, I had a chance to win. The major issue was that I needed to move out and leave Mary behind to prove I could provide a stable, safe, and independent home for her. So, at the end of July 2020, I made the hardest decision of my life and moved out of our family home into a 2-bedroom apartment, 1 room for me and 1, hopefully, for Mary. That same week, I was laid off from my job at the event planning agency. I felt miserable, like I had made the worst mistake of my life. My friends were a huge source of emotional support during that time because all I did was cry and worry about Mary. I had to gather all my strength to push past the overwhelming fear that took hold of me. My side gig became my main source of income, but I knew it wasn't enough to support both of us, so I started job hunting. Luckily, the company I had worked for previously had an opening in their PR team, and they hired me. The entire ordeal, from the day I moved out to securing a new job, lasted about 3 weeks. During that time, I was able to see Mary once a day for about an hour, as our mom allowed me to continue visiting her. She remained oddly calm throughout everything, which led me to believe she had lawyered up and had better odds than I did. I started reaching out to Mary's teachers, other parents I had good relationships with, her doctors, and a few family members. I was looking for people who could provide written support to show the court that I was the one who had been caring for Mary. I also made copies of every document and receipt I could find to back up my case. My friends even pitched in and gave me $1,500 to help with any potential costs. Then, something completely unexpected happened. My mother called and told me she was willing to give up legal custody of Mary and petitioned to have it transferred to me. The 4.5 weeks she spent caring for Mary alone made her realize she didn't want that responsibility. She was never really a mother to Mary and had no intention of becoming one. That realization hurt her deeply because I could tell she genuinely tried during those weeks, and Mary even told me that Mom had been nice to her. But ultimately, that wasn't the life she wanted. Even though I had been terrified that after I moved out, she might put Mary in a care facility, I was relieved that she admitted defeat and chose to do what was best for Mary. I finally felt like I could breathe. Things were looking up. The legal process was a bit delayed due to COVID, but it didn't take too long. Mary moved in with me, and we had a lot to catch up on. I had so much explaining to do, because she had been so overwhelmed after I left. We were settling into our new routine and were happy, though I was still nervous about the shifting COVID restrictions. School had already started, and navigating everything felt daunting. Mary has asthma, though it's well controlled and only flares up mildly during allergy season, but it was still a concern. Although Mary was still considered high risk due to her health, I held off on sending her back to in-person school during the pandemic. I worked from home Tuesday through Friday and only had to be in the office on Mondays. On those days, Mary stayed home with a nanny who was regularly tested and later vaccinated. However, the isolation was hard on Mary since she was so social, so I agreed to let her have one play date and one outing of her choice per week, which usually ended up being shopping. We also took daily walks and short nature trips, mostly just the two of us, though sometimes a friend would join. None of the precautions seemed enough, yet all of the outings felt like too much. Tragically, I lost Mary to COVID in February. One morning, she woke up with a fever, and I immediately knew something was wrong. Her symptoms escalated quickly, and the X-ray showed her lungs were severely affected. She was hospitalized the next day. By the second day, she was put into an induced coma and placed on a ventilator. She was stable for the first week, but then her blood pressure suddenly plummeted. My heart broke into a million pieces when I saw the caller ID flash at 11:26 p.m., and it stayed shattered ever since. My mother, who blames me completely, has moved back to Georgia to live with her sister. Since the day Mary died, I've felt like I've been both alive and dead. I haven't visited her grave since the funeral. Instead, I pay someone to leave fresh flowers for her and clean up the old ones each week. Sometimes I go to the cemetery and just stand by the fence, unable to move forward. I'm angry, miserable, numb, and heartbroken all at once. I've distanced myself from all my friends, even though they haven't given up on me. But I can't bring myself to accept their help. I feel like I don't deserve it. I feel responsible and guilty, as if the only way I deserve to live my life is in constant pain. If Mary didn't get a happy ending, why should I? I know I need help, therapy, and a way to cope with all of this, but I don't want that right now. Right now, I just want to spend my days in silence, talking only when necessary at work, barely surviving. I don't even feel worthy of escaping these feelings because my mind tells me I don't deserve an easy way out. By sharing this, I'm hoping, grasping really, that someone might say something that gives me just a tiny bit of strength to make it through the holiday season. Nobody loved Christmas more than Mary, and now the festive atmosphere suffocates me. The pain is the only thing I have left to remind me of how much love I had, and still have, for her. It's like I'm a grain of rice being crushed by a mountain of overwhelming emotions, and this is the only way I can ask for help, despite all the guilt and shame I feel. I'm sorry I can't share everything without risking my privacy, but Mary was hospitalized for weeks. She was doing well during the first week, but anyone familiar with ventilators knows it's a slow, difficult recovery. By the second week, I wasn't given much hope. In the following weeks, even though Mary tested negative for COVID at the time of her death, her little body was exhausted from fighting. Her blood pressure was the first thing to fail, worsening her fragile condition. So even though COVID didn't directly take her, it's the reason she's no longer with me. Without it, none of this would have happened. I'm sorry to leave things on such a heartbreaking note, but that's all I have right now. Thank you for listening to my story.